Jamestown Company or the Jamestown colony was settled by the Virginia Company, was it not? What was significant? Don't make me call on Elizabeth. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
They wanted to make money.
Yes, that is significant. It was a profit-making private venture. So, with Jamestown, a profit-making private venture chartered by the British Crown settled that colony. So they got a charter, they established a colony for the purpose of making a profit. And the Virginia company that initiated the settlement was a joint stock company. Now, a joint stock company would be analogous to a corporation. You know, in the Gilded Age, we had big corporations where there were multiple stockholders that bought shares of stock, the big trusts and the corporations of the Gilded Age. Their forefathers were the Virginia Company, where you had investors that pooled their money together in a joint stock company for the purpose of making a profit. And they thought they could profit in North America by establishing a colony, which was the Jamestown colony. Now, how did they initially expect to profit, and how did they eventually survive? JR, that is an excellent question. I'm so happy I asked it, and I'm so happy I called upon you to respond. JR, what did they initially think? They expected the profit. That's why they brought the company together. They established a colony. They thought they would profit by the establishment of the colony. How did they expect to profit? Yes, they expected to find gold, silver, precious metals, right? They thought maybe they'd find the Northwest Ordinance, or they hoped that maybe they would find a lucrative cash crop like sugar or like something similar to that. Eventually, though, how in fact, Lucy LeMayo, do they profit? What is crucial to the existence of the Jamestown colony? Tobacco, right? Tobacco is what is crucial to the Jamestown colony. It is John Rolfe, right, that discovers that a kind of experiments with strains of tobacco that can be productively grown in the soil and climate of Virginia, and it is tobacco that becomes the lucrative cash crop. Certainly there is a discussion about the nature of that colony, the male domination, the profit emphasis, you know, the terrible starving time. Oh, why? We said besides tobacco, why does it survive? We say, you know, the colony survives despite just terrible conditions. And, you know, in its first early, do you remember, dear Kristen, what we said the key to their success was? Well, yeah, so what's that Indian tribe? What was the chief? The Powhatatons, is that how they said? The Powhatan Indians, right? And that was Pocahontas, right? You know, and John Smith, the forceful leadership of John Smith, their connections with the Native Americans, eventually, you know, leads to the survival of the colony. But the colony really never becomes healthy, and the amount of women and really aren't equal to the amount of men till the turn of the century. So Jamestown and the surrounding Virginia colony really doesn't become a healthy, productive, self-sustaining colony until about 1700. It is a plantation-oriented economy. What does that mean? Jamestown, Virginia is a plantation-oriented economy. What does that mean, Doyle? It's maybe self-explanatory. I don't know. So then, yeah, it's kind of self-explanatory. You know, I mean, the focus of settlement is to establish large farms that are going to grow a lucrative cash crop on plantations. So what you don't find in Jamestown and what you don't find in eventually Virginia is towns. People scatter out in large farms in order to cultivate large amounts of cash crops for export, for sale. Now, in order to do that, in order to cultivate a large amount of cash crops, they need labor. Initially in Virginia and its kind of twin colony, Maryland, what was the source of labor that was used? Go ahead, dear worms.
Indentured servants?
Yes, indentured servants. Now tell me, Josh, tell me of indentured servants. What were they?
They were people who were trying to pay back a debt or make their way back to America
So they basically sold their labor. They sold themselves into slavery in return for passage to North America and, basically room, board, and other things while they labored. Now this seems kind of dumb, doesn't it? I mean, North America is unsettled. The British settlements there are fledgling. They're dangerous. They're constantly fused with Native Americans. The health and vitality of the people was subject to question. They didn't have kind of conveniences of that time. What did the indentured servants aspire to, Annie? What did they hope that they eventually would get? What lured them to do to sell themselves into slavery?
To have their own farm.
They wanted land. Land that was not widely available in Europe. Remember, these people saw land as economic security, as economic opportunity. Land in Europe was bequeathed to oldest sons of oldest sons of oldest sons of oldest sons. Frequently, the people that came to America were second and third sons, people that didn't have economic opportunity, and were willing to sell themselves into slavery, basically, for 7 years to do that. And so they came in large numbers. The number of indentured servants came in large numbers, and they labored on plantations, and then part of their compensation was land, freedom dues, that they took, and then they brought indentured servants into, and this is one of the ways that the Chesapeake colonies continued to exist. Now, when we say Chesapeake colonies, we refer to Virginia, which is established in 1607, and Maryland, which is established in 1629. Boy, I could be wrong about that. All right, 1629. Oh, now Maryland and Virginia are close. The climate is similar. Tobacco is similar. The indentured servitudes there are similar. But there is a fundamental difference between Maryland and Virginia. Does anyone besides the disinterested Phil, and I know, go ahead, Phil. Yeah, he is interested. He was writing. He was attentive, yes. Phil, do you remember what the fundamental difference? They were similar. They were tobacco. They were plantation. Indentured servants went there. Climate, topography, kind of the same. The difference was what? Oh, way to go, Phil. The difference was, first of all, Maryland was a proprietary colony. Virginia was a joint stock colony. What does, Elizabeth Yazvac, a proprietary colony, what does that mean to you, dear Elizabeth? It was a grant of land given to a proprietor by the crown. And who gave... Oh, maybe we probably don't know this. Maybe I don't know this either. Who gave Maryland to who? I hope I know this. Who gave Maryland to who? What king? Oh, this is going to be so embarrassing.
George II.
I know. It's George II. Is that what you have written? I know who gave it to. Not George the First. It's got to be Charles or James. It's got to be Charles the First. Charles the First gave Maryland to Lord Calvert. Right? Lord Calvert. Now, Lord Calvert was a persecuted Catholic, a British Catholic. Right? And that whole dispute about Catholicism and Protestantism and Catholic had been boiling, and Calvert was a minority, and he sought Maryland for economic opportunity and as a place that persecuted Catholics could go and worship freely, and be British, and they did. If you remember, we talked about in Maryland in 1649 they established for the first time the Religious Toleration Act, or the Toleration Act, which is the first piece of New World legislation that ensures some level of religious freedom. I mean, the separation between church and state that is so widely celebrated in the United States is something that evolves in colonial America. There are some people that go there to practice their religion freely. But I'm not sure there are a lot of people, maybe Penn, that establishes a colony to sort of ensure the free practice of religion. And in Maryland, the Religious Toleration Act limited religious freedom to anybody that believed in the Trinity.
Maria
So-
Cartieri, report to the main office. Maria Cartieri to the main office.
Jews did not have religious freedom there. And that was the reason that they limited it to the Trinity. So this whole full religious freedom that we know today is something that evolved. Now, also what evolves in the Chesapeake region, beginning in Virginia in 1619, is representative government. Right? Remember, the Virginia Company, a private company, gives the settlers in their colony, their business, a legislature, the House of Burgess. Now, we talked about that in class. The kids were bored, but we talked about it anyways, right? Alex, we said, look, why would they do this? And we said, one of the reasons that the company gave the people some level of self-rule was to attract settlers and to keep them there, right? I mean, there was some level of self-rule in England. I mean, they didn't have, democracy or even Republican government as we know it. But we see this starting to evolve with the Virginia House of Burgess in 1619. Ironically, the Virginia House of Burgess corresponds with the kind of evidence we have of the first African slaves being brought to British North America, also in 1619. Remember, we made a big deal of that. Obviously, the issue of slavery and eventually race relations is a big issue in American history. And you can be certain that there will be questions regarding that on the AP test. And we did that. I mean, we sort of introduced, the institution of slavery in Virginia. We went down to South Carolina and talked about, how the slave codes were established there. And, we established kind of, the presence of slavery in the tobacco regions, and traced it through the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and eventually how it becomes part of the discussion and the debate over its extension into territories that are acquired, as a prelude to the Civil War, and then exploding as an issue during the Civil War, and then being a terribly important issue in Reconstruction, going into the Progressive Era, and then sort of we'll pick it up again. So we sort of trace that through, and I'll review it real well with you when we get to that point. And I mean, one thing that is true too on the test that you have to do, that you haven't done so far, is always picked or altered these essay questions to keep you in a time frame, like the Jacksonian era or something like this. It's not, the AP doesn't feel compelled to do that. They may ask you to compare time frames. Compare this time frame to that time frame, in some ways, So, and it's hard when you're going through it. So sometimes I try to, give a perspective to it. But anyways, that is 1619. One last thing I'll say about this, and then I'll let you go. In terms of the African slaves that come to Virginia, remember, they are inconsequential until around the turn of the century. In Virginia. Slavery in Virginia in the Chesapeake region is inconsequential until around the turn of the 18th century. The reason being, white indentured servants provides for the Virginia plantations a more stable labor force, a more productive labor force than African slaves until then. And remember, we traced this through. We said, around 1700, things changed. One of the things, I promise, this is the last thing, don't pack it up just yet. It's the last thing I promise you. All right, the last thing, you can do it. You have a blue shirt at your house.
I do.
Yeah. All right, wear it on Friday. Now, one of the things that facilitates the transformation is Bacon's Rebellion. They love that. The AP loves Bacon's Rebellion, Dorr's Rebellion, all of these kind of little skirmishes where the disgruntled underclass rises up against the upper class. Even in Virginia, there was class distinctions. There was the plantation owners of Virginia that kind of dominated the government and the economy there. And then there were the landless former indentured servants that were rallied by Nathaniel Bacon to attack Jamestown, not Jamestown. What's the capital of Richmond? What do we go? Where do you go to see the people?
Harper Street.
I don't know. Richmond. Williamsburg, yeah, attacked Williamsburg. To attack Williamsburg, yeah. They attacked Williamsburg and kind of overthrew the governor, chased the governor out of there. So that Bacon's Rebellion is another reason why I said, well, you know, gee, maybe we need a more docile and controllable labor force. One that we can repress and won't threaten sort of safety, security, and order in the colony. And so that contributes to it as well. Well, okay, when we come back on Thursday, we will try to quickly do New England and get to the revolution, you know, as best we can. So, okay, thank you for your